हेलो। अभी अभी आ रही है आवाज?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
गुड टू गो। So let's start again. At that time, due to some technical issue, we couldn't able to continue. Now let's start again. So today we are going to discuss about the Union Budget 23-24, and this is particularly very important for the people who are appearing for the this year civil service examination and the other competitive examination, as we have already discussed. We are aware about the union budget, what is the process of preparation of budget, and the parliamentary aspect of the budget. We know that budget is mentioned in the constitution. The word budget is not mentioned, but the term which is mentioned for the budget is the annual financial statement, and this is mentioned in the article 112 in the constitution of India. That is annual financial statement. So every year union government comes with the a money bill, that is called the annual financial statement or the union budget. In budget, what they do, we are very much aware about the process of budget preparation. The finance ministry is responsible for preparation of budget, and the all the ministries which are there in the union government, they ask for money, or they demand money from the Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Finance respond in the budget on their demands. They issue they issue the grants to the different ministries, and that is mentioned in the budget. Because all the money of tax mostly go to the Consolidated Fund of India, and Consolidated Fund of India comes under the control of the Parliament. So whenever government want to withdraw money from the Consolidated Fund of India, they must take the permission of the Parliament. And in order to take permission from the Parliament, they need to pass a bill in the Parliament, in the both house of the Parliament. So money bill or the budget which is a money bill, is nothing but a kind of procedure in which the government want to withdraw money from the Consolidated Fund of India for the expenditure purposes, and in order to do that, they need to pass the budget in the Parliament. This is what we are very much aware, because we studied all these things, all the technicalities in the our public finance chapter. So now today we will understand about the union budget of 23-24, which came on the 1st of February. So let's discuss about the union budget. So here we can see the Nirmala Sitharaman, she is the finance minister, and the other bureaucrats are also there. So first, let's understand what is the basic theme of the this year's union budget. We must understand the basic theme, because that helps us understanding the vision of the government regarding the current status of the economy, and what government is thinking, what is the long-term vision of the government. So Nirmala Sitharaman's balancing act in the union budget 23, the whole budget is summarized in such a way that it is called as the balancing act. So what kind of balance the finance ministry did, we will understand in this today's lecture. So the won't tax and will spend. So first thing is the won't tax. Won't tax means the government is going on the path of not increasing the tax on the common man mostly. Okay, so this budget is particularly concentrated on the middle class, the salaried income people, so that what government is doing, government is trying to uh, make their disposable income enough, so that they can consume more, because Indian economy is consumption based economy, and right now the Indian economy is facing trouble. All the major economies in the world are facing trouble because of the once in a century pandemic, the COVID-19. After that, some geopolitical issues like the Russia-Ukraine war. Because of that, the supply chain got disrupted, and some other, the inflationary pressure is also there in the global scenario, and same things also impacted the Indian economy. So if government want to revive the growth, then government must focus on the consumption pattern of the people. So in order to revive the consumption, what government need to do? Government need to increase the disposable income of the people. So in order to increase that, government can reduce taxation, or government can matlab, government should not increase the taxation, so that the disposable income of the common man can be at par with the, so that they can spend more, and that helps in the creating a virtuous cycle of the economy, that we are very much aware that when the disposable income will be more, they will consume more, and when they consume more, there will be demand of the products, then companies will invest more money in the production process, and ultimately what will happen? Ultimately, in order to produce more, they will invest more, and they will employ more people in the industries. And when more people will be employed, then again the disposable income of the common man will increase, and that helps in creating a virtuous cycle of the economy. So currently there are so many challenges which Indian economy is particularly facing. We will discuss about those challenges. But roughly, we are very much aware that the once in a century pandemic, the COVID-19 created created many problems for the economy, because of the lockdown, and the halted production process, and especially the tangible industries faced so many problems. So COVID-19 was one of the biggest challenge which economies faced, and after that the geostrategical problem, that is the geopolitical tension between the Russia and Ukraine. The Russia-Ukraine wars are always inflationary also. So the inflationary pressure is all over the world, especially in the US and the United Kingdom. And the Indian economy, for last 20-23 years, you can say, post liberalization, the Indian economy is very much very much connected with the this global world, and especially with the advanced economies, the G20. You can say that with the advanced economies, Indian economy is very much connected, because the trade is very trade between all these countries is very high, and the impact of slowdown in any of the major economy definitely impacts the other economies which are continuously in the trade with with other economies. So India is in very much consonance with the in connection with the advanced economies. So if anything macroeconomic instability occur somewhere in the United States or the United Kingdom or in the European Union, then definitely that would have its impact on the Indian economy. So currently that is also there. So let's move forward, that these are some of the challenges which India and other economies faced. Now let's move forward. So here we can understand in this budget what government did. Government did the balancing act, and the balancing act says that we won't tax much. When you won't tax much, you will try to increase the disposable income of the people. So first thing is they won't tax much. Second is they will spend more. Means government want to spend more money. Now more money, where they will spend, we will discuss about it. So government is going to spend, and government is not going to tax much. So salaried income employees or salaried people, regular salaried people, will definitely have a positive news for them, according to this perspective which we are understanding right now. So won't tax and will spend. So in a last full budget ahead of Lok Sabha election next year, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman kept her focus on two key aspects. We are aware that in 2024, the general elections are due. So before the general election, the budget, when the in the February 2024, when the budget will come, that budget would be the interim budget, because before the general election, the budget usually comes, that is called the interim budget. Okay, that is not the full budget. And this is the 2023, and elections are due in the next year. So this is the last full budget of this government. So in the last full budget ahead of Lok Sabha election next year, Union Minister kept her focus on two key aspects. Now, what are the two key aspects? The first key aspect is the growth. First key aspect is the growth. By setting aside a large outlay for an unprecedented surge in the capital spending. Now, government want a very good growth rate. Definitely, government want a very good economic a growth rate in the economy. So in order to attain that growth rate, what government is doing? Government is focusing on the area that is called the capital spending. That is called the capital spending. Now, just to recall the chart we made in the public finance chapter. That in the public finance, we know that the budget is there. In budget, there are two accounts. In budget, there are two accounts. First is the revenue, and second is the capital. In the revenue account, we are aware there are two parts. First is the receipt part, which the government receive in the revenue account, and the expenditure part, which government spend in the revenue account. So in the revenue account, there are two heads: the revenue receipts, which government receive, and the expenditure, which government spend. On the other hand, the capital account is also there. In the capital account, we have two heads again. First is the capital receipts, and the second is the capital expenditure. So these four heads are there in the annual financial statement of the government. Here, the government is focusing on spending. Now, spending can be of two types. One can be in the revenue account, second can be in the capital account. In the revenue account, we know the revenue receipts are there. Some of the examples of revenue receipts are what? The salary of the employees, the regular day-to-day expenditure, and the third is the pension. The subsidies are also there. Okay, so these are some of the revenue expenditure of the government, and we are very much aware that the revenue expenditure is a kind of committed expenditure, and government have a very little scope to reduce that. So revenue expenditure is very sensitive, and government is committed to do that, because you cannot decrease the salary, or you cannot like go in such a way that you are not paying to the people for 3-4 months to your employees. So that can't be the condition. Pension must be paid to the old age people. So all these expenditure in the revenue account are the committed expenditure. Now, on the other hand, is the capital expenditure, and capital expenditure is for the infrastructure creation. So for infrastructure case, that is a long term expenditure. Now we know in the overall these two accounts, what usually happened in the Indian economy. We are very much aware, because we discussed all the things in the detail, and those students who are right now first time trying to understand this budget, then they must go to the public finance chapter and understand the budget and all the related terminology. So it would be helpful for them to understand the budget in a better and bigger manner. So here come again to the point we are discussing, that revenue account is committed, revenue expenditure is committed expenditure, and capital expenditure for the infrastructure creation, which helps India attaining sustainability and create good opportunities for the future and give very good return in the future. So in India, what usually happens, that the India always have the revenue deficit, because India's revenue receipts are not at par with the revenue expenditure. So when there is a revenue deficit, what government do? Government take the money out of the capital part of the budget, and help the revenue, help in the financing of the revenue deficit, because revenue deficit is the committed expenditure. So there would be less money available for the capital expenditure, and that is not a very good a progressive idea, because if you have less money for the infrastructure creation, that is not a very good idea, because a government should always spend money on the infrastructure creation in the capital expenditure, so that they can have a higher returns in the future. That's a kind of investment. Okay, and it is a kind of transfer, because you are paying them for the services they have provided to you. So this is not a good idea, that the revenue deficit is financed by the money from the capital account, which is not good. So you must understand that the revenue deficit should be as low as possible, and the capital expenditure must be high, so that you can create returns in the future that helps in the sustainability of the economy. So we are very much aware. Now here, just understand again, the growth, it is talking about growth. The first aspect which the finance minister discussed in the budget is the growth. They want a very good growth in the economy. So for growth, they need to invest money. No? Definitely they need to invest money. So government said that we will spend more, that we will spend. Now there are two kind of expenditure we just discussed: the revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure. Revenue is committed and capital is for infrastructure. Here the government is saying that we will increase our capital spending. Means government is thinking about creation of the infrastructure, the capital formation, so that they can generate the high returns in the future. So government's core focus in the whole budget is on the capital expenditure and the infrastructure creation, so they can fetch or they can reap the benefit of the infrastructure in the future and create sustainability in the economy. So first thing is the growth you must keep in mind, because you must understand the vision of the government, because your examination is all about government, let me tell you. Okay, criticism would be there, definitely criticism would be there if something is done by the government. There is always two sides of the coin. Something has done, something has not been done. But here you need to understand what government is thinking, what is the vision of the government, and that will definitely help you fetching good marks in the prelims as well as mains, and also in the interview. So growth is the one thing, and government is focusing on the spending money in the capital expenditure. So first is the growth. Second is the fiscal consolidation. Now fiscal sorry fiscal consolidation, we are very much aware about fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation is all about reduction in the fiscal deficit. We will not say the reduction in the fiscal deficit, we will say that the fiscal deficit should be in the anticipated range. It is not about always the reduce the fiscal deficit to zero. No, it's not about that. It is about fiscal consolidation is all about having the fiscal deficit within the anticipated targets. If you are deciding that your target is to have the fiscal deficit at the 3% of the GDP, then if you are very much near to 3% of the if your fiscal deficit is very much near to 3% of the GDP, it means you are going on the right track. You are going on the path of the fiscal consolidation. Okay, so fiscal consolidation is all about the smaller fiscal deficit and according to your anticipated targets. Okay, so that's the fiscal consolidation. Government is going on the path of the fiscal consolidation. That is the second consideration, second key aspect, which is the part of this whole budget. First is the growth, and growth will come from the capital expenditure. And on the other hand, the second is the fiscal consolidation, means government will go as per the target they have decided and try to attain that goal of fiscal deficit, whatever that is. So fiscal consolidation by slashing subsidies. Now we are very much aware again that government is saying we will spend more. If government will spend more, then what will happen? The fiscal deficit will be high. Fiscal deficit will be high. Here government is saying we will spend more. In the first point, government is saying that we want a very good growth rate on the basis of the capital expenditure. We will spend more money in the capital account. Now on the other hand, government is saying we are doing the fiscal consolidation. It means we are going to reduce our fiscal deficit, or we will try to attain our fiscal deficit target. How these two things are a little bit contradictory, because on the one hand government is increasing capital spending, on the other hand government is saying that we will do the fiscal consolidation, means we will try to reduce our fiscal deficit. And in order to reduce fiscal deficit, what government need to do? Government need to decrease its spendings. So here these are two contradictory things, but again come to the same chart which we discussed in the public finance about the revenue account and the capital account. In the capital account there are capital expenditure, in revenue account there are revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure are committed expenditure. It is very difficult for the government to reduce those expenditure, but still here government is trying to rationalize the expenditure in the revenue account. How government is rationalizing? We are very much aware you cannot reduce the salary, or you cannot cannot go in such a manner that you are not paying salary for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. No, it can't be done. Pension is really crucial, but yeah, subsidies are there. Subsidies can be rationalized. Subsidies is a kind of help, and subsidies is a kind of dole. So that can be rationalized, and government is focusing on rationalizing the subsidies in this budget. They reduced so many subsidies, and when they reduce the subsidy, then ultimately their revenue account or the revenue deficit will be definitely decreased, or revenue deficit, there might be possibility that revenue account is not going in the deficit part also. So there is a possibility. First thing is, okay, so in the fiscal consolidation part, government is trying to reduce the subsidies or rationalizing the subsidies. First thing. So when rationalize subsidy, the revenue expenditure would be less, and revenue expenditure would be less. That will help in reduction in the fiscal deficit. First thing. Now, by slashing subsidies and spending on the job guarantee schemes. Now we know there is one job guarantee scheme for the rural area, that is the MG Narega, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, or the scheme you can say. Under that scheme, government is committed to provide the 100 days, that is the legal entitlement, means for 100 days the 100 days employment will be provided to the beneficiary, whoever is coming for the MG Narega. 100 days के लिए must होगा. Now on the under that scheme, government is reducing the amount. Government is reducing the amount it is spending on the MG Narega. So in MG Narega, government is reducing that amount, and the subsidies they are rationalizing. So in these two, the outlay by the government is reduced, so that the government can can save money, and the fiscal consolidation will happen, and the fiscal deficit target can be achieved. Okay, so these are the two things, the growth and the fiscal consolidation, on which the government focused in this budget 23-24. Okay, so till now, anybody have any problem? You can ask me now. No?
No, sir.
Okay, good. Now let's understand first is what is the growth strategy. Now government is saying we will go on the path of the growth on the basis of the capital expenditure, but let's expand it. What is the growth strategy of the government? Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has stuck to the growth strategy that she first unveiled in 2019. We discussed about it in 2019, before the COVID era, before the pandemic occurred. In 2019, government came with the with a new strategy for attaining the growth for the upcoming years, and that strategy was all about the path of the fiscal prudence. Here, stay on the path of the fiscal prudence, you can say fiscal prudence. Okay, so what is the fiscal prudence? Fiscal prudence means you must take decision after considering all the fiscal aspects of the fiscal deficit, and all the viability you must see, the feasibility you must see, whether you should go on the path of the expansionism or the popular grand populist announcement, which are not fiscally prudent, which will worsen the fiscal condition of the government. We should not go on that path. This is what in 2019 the finance ministry came up with. Okay, so government is thinking of going on the path of the fiscal prudence, means every decision must be taken in such a way that should not disbalance all the existing thing in the fiscal scenario. So that was the fiscal prudent path. So in 2019, government decided that it will go on the path of the fiscal prudence. Now, in this budget, the government is, or the finance ministry is, stuck to the growth strategy. The same growth strategy means in this budget, the government said that we will go on the same strategy that we unveiled in the 2019. That is, we will go on the path of the fiscal prudence and incentivize the private sector to invest more in the economy's productive capacity. So here the second thing is, the first, they are going on the path of fiscal prudence, which is always desirable. On the other hand, the most important thing is the private sector must get its due. It's all about the private sector, means private sector is very helpful in the increasing the productive capacity of the economy, because private industries always generate the employment at a very large scale, and they help in the creating the virtuous cycle of the economy. So the private sector should not be always seen as the enemy of the open society. No, it is not like that. They should be incentivized in such a way that there should be a proper balance between the proper balance between the the exemptions government is giving to them, and on the other hand the welfare of the common man. So all these things must be balanced. So this government is acknowledging the importance of the private sector in order to create a win-win situation for all the stakeholders in the economy. So it is giving importance to the private sector. So path is fiscal prudence and other is the private sector. The importance incentivize the private sector uh, to invest more in the economy's productive capacity. Even though it is the last full-fledged budget before the Lok Sabha election, Finance Minister Sitharaman chose to stick to the growth strategy that she first unveiled in 2019 when she announced a historic corporate tax cut. Now, we are very much aware that in 2019, before 2019, the corporate tax rates were very high. Uh, we know that in the gross tax revenue, the total tax which government received, that is a direct tax or indirect tax, in the gross tax revenue, a huge chunk of receipts comes from the corporate tax. Corporate tax is a kind of direct tax, and the almost in this recent data, 26% of the gross tax revenue comes from the corporate tax. 26% of the gross tax revenue comes from the corporate tax. Means it is a huge chunk of the money which government receives in terms of the corporate tax. On the other hand, 26% comes from the direct tax and 28% comes from the GST. Okay, so overall, if you will talk about component wise, the GST is at number one, 28% in the gross tax revenue. At number two and number three, both are same. The corporate tax and the direct tax both have 26%. Okay, so this is the hierarchy. So highest is 28% GST and 26% corporate tax, 26% the direct tax. We'll discuss about the taxation and all these things in the our upcoming slides. But you must take these things in mind. So in 2019, along with the fiscal prudence, government gave importance to the private sector, and in 2019 itself, government came up with the corporate tax cut. That's the historic corporate tax cut because before 2019, the corporate tax rates were very high. Very high corporate tax rates were ultimately disincentivizing the private people, because high tax rate never helped the private people to reap the benefit of their own labor. So in order to help them, incentivizing them, government reduced the corporate tax corporate tax rates in 2019, which incentivize private people and help in attaining the atmosphere of ease of doing business. Okay, that is the corporate tax cut. Now, this growth strategy had two prongs. Now, first is the incentivizing the private sector. We are aware the incentivizing the private sector in this. Now come to 2034, 2324 in this budget. Okay. First is the incentivizing the private sector in the economy to invest in the productive capacity and thereby create jobs and push growth. Definitely, if private sector would be incentivized, what will happen? The private sector will invest more, and when private sector will invest more, what will happen? They will create employment, and creation of employment will ultimately increase the livelihood of the common man and the disposable income of the common man, which ultimately increase the consumption in the economy, and again we will attain the virtuous cycle of the economy. These all things are interrelated to each other. So you in very in our beginning we discussed about the virtuous cycle of the economy, that all things are interconnected and money flows in a circular manner. So if all the major dimension of the economy are on the right track or are doing well, then the whole economy will be on the right track. But in case any of the dimension is going on the wrong track or not going according to the prudent decisions, in that case economy would be disturbed, and all that virtuous cycle will be can be converted into the vicious cycle. There is a possibility, always a possibility. Okay, so let's move forward. First, the incentivize the private sector in the economy. First thing is the second is increasing the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure would be increased on the one hand, and raising more revenues via disinvestment and privatization on the other. Now understand it. This is a very important point. The whole vision of the government you can see in the budget. First, incentivizing the private sector. Second, increasing the capital expenditure on the one end. This we discussed. And raising more revenues. Now government want to increase its revenue. Government want to increase its revenue because ultimately, if you are going on the path of fiscal consolidation, what you will do? You will try to increase your revenues, you increase your receipts, and try to reduce your expenditure. This is what is the imperative. So expenditure part we discussed, the revenue part and the capital part. In the capital part, government is going up. Okay, they want to increase the outlay, they want to increase the expenditure. On the other hand, the revenue expenditure they are going to reduce because they rationalize the subsidies. Now the expenditure part is clear. Now on the revenue part, government want to increase its revenue, definitely, because increasing the revenue is the imperative if you want to reduce your fiscal deficit. So raising more revenues via, now how will you increase your revenue? Via disinvestment and privatization on the other. Disinvestment and privatization means government is going to disinvest or the privatize the public sector assets, the public sector asset. Government owned assets or government owned companies which are not doing well, government will go on the path of strategic disinvestment. We discussed in our lectures what is strategic disinvestment. Okay, so government will try to reduce its stake, government will sell its stakes. Okay, so if government is selling its stakes in such a manner that its own stakes is going below 50%, that would be the privatization, because then the company would belong to the private people. And if government is going or selling a minority stake or just a 5%, 10% in such a way that the overall stakes of the government are still more than 50%, that is called the disinvestment. So this is the difference between the disinvestment and the privatization. This is it. Is it clear? Difference between disinvestment and the privatization? Please respond.
सर और
Yes,
एक बार
sir.
रिपीट कीजिए.
Okay. Just understand, there is the government company, that is PSU, public sector undertaking. PSUs are all government companies. Central government is owning all the, and there are 100 shares. Okay, or 100 shares or the 100% shares are there, and all the 100% shares are owned by government, that is PSU. But what is the general rule? General rule is that whoever is owning more than 50% share is called the owner of the company. So here 100% shares are owned by the government. There is a possibility that 60% is owned by government and 40% by the private people. There is a possibility. But whoever will own more than 50% is called the owner of the company. So in case is there, if there is a 60-40, 60% with the government and 40% with the private, then still this company is owned by the government only, because government have more than 50%. So now understand the first example, that is the government have 100% stakes of the company, of any company. Now government is selling 10% stakes of the company. Okay, after selling 10% stakes, 90% stakes are still held by the government. Means the ownership of this company is still held by the government. Okay, but 10% stakes has been sold. This selling of this 10% stakes, which results, which doesn't change the ownership of this, the ownership of the company. The government still hold the ownership of the company. That is called the minority sell. Okay, and that is called the disinvestment. That is called the disinvestment. Okay, because ownership is still with the government. But in case government is going with the selling of the 60% stake. Okay, 60% stakes has been sold by the government. Now government is owning only 40% and 60% are held by the private people. Then the company is fully privatized. This is called privatization. Okay, because government is no more owning that company. So this is the difference between the disinvestment and the privatization. Okay, now clear?
Yes, sir.
So now government want to increase its revenue. Now how government can increase its revenue? There is a possibility that government can increase the tax rate. If government will increase the tax rate, then gross tax revenue will increase definitely. Okay, first thing. But government, in the very beginning, government said that we won't tax. Means we are not going to increase the tax. Means government is not increasing the tax. This is very much clear. On the other hand, there are other virtues from which the government can receive money. And the very important and the bigger virtue is the disinvestment and privatization. So here government is blatantly mentioned that we will increase our revenue via disinvestment and the privatization. So revenue will be increased by the disinvestment and privatization, and expenditure we will try to rationalize and reduce. Got it? So government is going on the path of fiscal consolidation. This is clear. So these are two important part of the growth strategy. This was done to ensure that the government maintain fiscal prudence and doesn't splurge on populist scheme. Populist scheme, what are the populist scheme? Populist schemes are those schemes which usually comes to lure the people. That the if you are providing like kind of freebies that you are giving money to the people, distributing money or something which is not fiscally prudent, means according to your fiscal viability, that scheme is not good, because that will ultimately worsen your fiscal deficit, and you won't go on the fiscal glide path. Okay, there is a possibility. So those schemes are usually come to lure the people in order to grab or the to fetch more votes in the upcoming election. Those are called the populist schemes. All the governments go on the path of populist scheme. They do it in order to win the election. In democracy, everything is possible. Okay, so that's the growth strategy. Now, what is the current state of Indian economy according to budget? Okay, we are not discussing about the economic survey. This is what the government said. So, government said means this is also authenticated data. Don't worry. The current state of Indian economy. The first thing to remember is that even before COVID, the Indian economy was suffering from a secular deceleration in growth. Now, this is very important because in so many cases, the paradigm change has been visible in the sphere of the economy, that the pandemic has changed everything, and all the things are going in the absolutely different direction, from the if you will compare these dimension of the economy from the pre-COVID period. This is the general say, but you need to understand that growth rate of India is even today is not on a very good track, but still we are as compared to the other big economies, we are on a right track. We have, because we have comparatively, we have not absolutely, I'm telling you comparatively our fiscal strength is better as compared to the other larger economies, bigger economies. Okay, we are not talking about Sweden and Finland. We are talking about the bigger economies like USA, China, and all these. So in these economies, India is doing comparatively well. So here we need to understand that even before COVID, our growth rate was not very good. So here we need to acknowledge that the first thing to remember is that even before COVID, the Indian economy was suffering from a secular deceleration is good. Secular deceleration means was a linear decline. There was a linear decline in the growth rate, and the reason for the decline in the growth rate was two important reason. First was the demonetization, and the second was the implementation of the GST, because these were two major reforms, kind of reforms we can say, that came suddenly, and they disrupted the economic activities in the country, because in the wake of demonetization, the liquidity in the Indian market, which is the consumption based market, slashed very sharply, and because of that, the consumption of all the things was consumption pattern has been changed entirely for at least for the 3 4 months 6 months, and 3 4 months 6 months is enough to destroy your growth rate. Okay, so demonetization was one of the thing. Second was the implementation of GST, because implementation of GST was in such a way that so many small businesses in the very initial phase faced so many problems. Okay, so because of that also, the growth rate was not at par with the actual potential. Okay, so till 2016 things were okay, but post demonetization and the implementation of GST within the period of almost 6 7 months, okay, the things didn't go well with India. So even before the occurrence of the COVID, Indian economy was suffering from a secular deceleration because there was a decline in the growth rate. In the financial year 1920, which ended in March 2020, the economy grew at 3.7%. Now, this is really important because COVID-19 came in the December 2019. That's why it is called COVID-19. But it was in the China, and it spreaded gradually. And in India, I think first case came in the February, and till March, at the time our financial year ended, India was not impacted very much from the COVID. After that, India faced so many troubles, and the COVID spreaded with a very high, uh, whenever high rate. So here we need to understand in the financial year 1920 means it's a kind of pre-COVID. The economy grew at 3.7%, which is a very, very very less growth rate according to the potential. So in financial year, the economy grew at 3.7%. RBI's research shows that India's potential growth rate. What is the potential growth rate? Potential growth rate is the exit potential of the economy. Means the inflation is a thing which is controlled by the government, and all government and the central bank and the other aspects are also there. But what is the exit potential? So if we don't take inflation into consideration, that gives us a picture of the exit potential. So potential growth rate is the rate at which it can grow without inflation becoming a problem. So if inflation is not a problem, for example, if inflation is going according to the wishes of the government and RBI, okay, if inflation is going according to the wishes of the government and RBI, then what is the exact productivity, or what is the exact output a country can generate? That is called the potential growth rate. Okay, that is called the potential growth rate. I'm not saying inflation is not there. Inflation is there, but inflation is according to the wishes of the government or the central bank of country. So if inflation is not a problem, that is called the potential growth rate. So that a rate at which it can grow without inflation becoming a problem has been falling over the past 2 decades. Now, this is very important. In prelims, UPSC sometimes ask these things. Okay, so the question based on the trends. So this is very important, that it is saying that the potential growth rate is falling over the past 2 decades. Okay, past, for last 20 years, the potential growth rate of the country is declining. Means somewhere the inflation is becoming a problem for the country for the last 20 years. This is what you need to inculcate in your mind, that for last 20 years our potential growth rate is declining, is falling. In the 200308, this phase, okay, this was the phase of the UPA1. Okay, UPA1, when the Dr. Manmohan Singh was prime minister, the first UPA phase, which was India's highest growth period. So this was a highest growth period for India ever. The potential growth rate was 8%. So that was the period in which the growth rate was very high, almost 8%. This was also a jobless growth. We discussed about the jobless growth, but still, because the service sector did really well in this phase. So India's highest growth period ever, you must keep in mind, 2003 to 08, this was the India's highest growth period ever. The potential growth rate was 8%. Between 2009 and 2015, it fell to 7%. Means the potential growth rate was 8% in this period. Between 9 and 15, it fell to 7%. As the economic survey said, by the time COVID hit India, the potential growth rate had fallen to 6%. Okay, means the potential growth rate is continuously falling over the past 2 decades. For last 20 years, the potential growth rate is falling. This is what you must keep in mind.
सर इसमें कितना था 2003 to 8 में ग्रोथ रेट?
8% बताया ना पोटेंशियल ग्रोथ रेट.
सर नहीं, नॉर्मल ग्रोथ रेट.
नॉर्मल ग्रोथ रेट ऑलमोस्ट 6-7-8 के आसपास चल रहा था. द ग्रोथ रेट वाज रियली हाई. ओके. But in 2008, when that crisis happened, Lehman Brothers crisis in the USA, subprime crisis. After that crisis, there was the global slowdown. So India also faced the wrath of that 2008 Lehman Brothers crisis. Okay. So after that, the growth declined, but India uh, hadn't faced the much wrath as compared to the other European countries and the USA, because India's fiscal health was relatively good. So the GDP is calculated by wait. So here what we are trying to understand. We are trying to understand the current state of the Indian economy. And we are very much aware again that even before the COVID came, the the growth rate was not very high and not according to the potential of the Indian economy. And the potential growth rate is for last 2 decades is declining. Now we know that we studied about the national income accounting, and I think one lecture is still remaining for national income accounting. Okay, we will do it, complete it. We know how to calculate GDP. We know what is GDP. GDP is if we will take the rough idea, GDP is nothing but the overall production within the geographical territory of the country. That is the GDP. So the GDP is calculated by looking at the spending by 4 different segments of the economy. Now remember the 3 methods: production method, value addition method, and the expenditure method. There were 3 methods of calculating the GDP. Here we are talking about the expenditure method. The GDP is calculated by looking at the spending by 4 different segments of the economy, of the 4 main engines of GDP growth. Now wait. Let's look at this. This is the extra slide for you, so you can recall the expenditure method. We know there are 4 players: the household, government, business firms, and foreign nationals. Can you recall these things? So if we will add all the expenditure occurred by these 4 players, that will help us in getting the figures of our GDP. So households, government, business firms, and foreign nationals. Okay, so that is the expenditure method. इसी की बात कर रहा है यहाँ. Here it is talking about that. So the GDP is calculated by looking at the spending by 4 different segments of economy, of the 4 main engines of the GDP growth. First is the private consumption. Private consumption is nothing but the expenditure by the common man. Here, you know, households, the private final consumption expenditure, that C. We are talking about the C. The first is the 4 main engine. First is the private consumption, which refers to what Indians spend in their personal capacity. Accounts for 56% of the GDP. Means out of these 4, almost 56% comes from this part, C. Out of these, the total expenditure, 56% comes from the private final consumption expenditure. Okay. So the private consumption that accounts for 56% of the GDP. These expenditures had grown by just 8% over the financial year 20 levels. Means if we calculate the growth in the private consumption today as compared to the financial year 20 means this financial year pre-COVID, then there is only 8% growth. Which is very low, very low. So here we can see that there are 4 players. Okay, first is the private player or the household. The expenditure made by the household is part of the whole total expenditure that will help us getting the figures of GDP. So here we can see that almost 56% part of this total expenditure comes from the private final consumption expenditure, C. And now here we are saying that there is only 8% growth. There is only 8% growth in the private consumption today as compared to this 1920 financial year. So this 8% is really very low, because 3 years has been passed in between. So 8% is very low. First thing. Second, The second biggest engine of growth, accounting for 33% of India's GDP, are the expenditure towards investment. Expenditure towards investment. Now, what is the investment? Yes, this is the investment expenditure by the business firms. So this business firm expenditure, this I comprises of almost 33% of total expenditure. C comprises of private, means 56%, I 33%. UPSC can ask questions, let me tell you. UPSC sometimes ask question like this. Okay. Even in the past, in the last year, I think it asked about the question of the government debt. The in the government debt, the UPSC asked, we will discuss about that question, that uh, a major part of the government debt comes from this X particular things. So this kind of question UPSC can ask from the budget and economic survey. Definitely, you must read between the lines. They ask questions. So here UPSC can ask a question like this: that in the consumption of the in the calculation of the GDP from the expenditure method or something like that, the highest uh, you know mm, contribution comes from the private final consumption expenditure. They can ask it, okay, or investment expenditure, something like that. So you must understand that C, that is the private final consumption expenditure, makes the 56% of the total expenditure, 33% by the investment expenditure. So here we understood that the private consumption just grown by just 8% over the financial year 20 levels. Means in last 3 years only 20%, only 8% growth is there, which is very low. Second is the investment. Investment means the expenditure by the business firms, which involves firms both big and small, and the government spending on creating productive capacity, such as building a road. गवर्नमेंट की जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का इन्वेस्टमेंट है वो इसमें आएगा. Here accounting for 33% of India's GDP, and in this business firms investment is also increased by a very very low percentage, very low percentage. The increase in this is also very low. The figure is not here. I will edit it while uploading it. Okay. So this investment by the business firms is also very low as compared to the financial year 20. The third engine, accounting for 11% of GDP, the everyday expenditure of the government. Now, government's expenditure, not capital one, the everyday expenditure, kind of revenue, accounting for 11% of GDP. This spending is expected to be just 7% above this. 7% increase is there. The fourth engine is the net export. We are aware this is net export, expenditure by foreigners. Import minus export, and since imports are higher than export, this has been pulling down the GDP. Now net export is going down because our imports are higher than the export. So this is pulling down the GDP. So this is going negative, especially as exports have faltered due to global slowdown. Global slowdown occurred in between, and our export has been faltered. So net export part में तो अपन negative growth में चले गए. We went into negative as compared to the FY20. It means these all components, out of these all components are not doing very well when we are comparing these to the financial year 20 pre-COVID. We are not comparing in between, because in COVID time all the things got disturbed, but now we are coming on the track. That's why we are comparing from the pre-COVID level. So here these four things are there. Now this data show that there is a all-round weakness in the economy, because the growth level is not that much, means there is a weakness in the economy. Most economists have argued that the biggest problem is the private consumption is weak. Now we are very much aware that almost 56% of the total expenditure is coming from the consumption, private final consumption expenditure. Means if it will have a very huge impact on the total expenditure. So if total expenditure as compared to the financial year 20 is relatively low, then somewhere private final consumption expenditure would be definitely responsible for it. And some economists are saying that the private final consumption expenditure is low. Means you need to increase the consumption pattern of the private people. Okay, you need to increase the consumption pattern. Private consumption is weak. That's because people have been suffering one blow to their income after another. Now, why this happened? This happened because till financial year 20, there were not very big problems were there. Okay, like COVID was not there, the global slowdown was not there, the global inflationary pressure was not there. But in between, in these 3 years, what happened? That's because people have been suffering one blow to their income after another, and this has over time led to tepid demand. Okay, so what happened? Like all these aspects, the COVID aspect, the inflationary pressure, and all these things. When all these things compiled and resulted into the tepid demand. Tepid demand means the demand, their consumption has been reduced, so hence hence demand also reduced. In the absence of demand, businesses have stayed away from investing heavily. Very simple. If demand is not there, why would businesses invest? They won't invest. So investment also reduced. Even the modest 15% increase over the past 3 years is largely towards replacing old investment, not making new ones. Means there was an investment, but just to replace the older one, because things got depreciated. The instruments got depreciated, so they must be replaced. So what private what the businesses invested almost 15% increase was there, 15% increase in investment, but that investment was not to create the new assets, it was just to replace the old investments. It means it was a kind of balancing act. They are not going on the path of expansion. So these are the things. Okay, this is extra slide added for the understanding. This had made matters worse in the global slowdown. Okay, wait. Now, what has made matters worse is the global slowdown. Now, global slowdown is there. Over the past 2 decades, India's growth cycle have got increasingly synchronized by that of advanced economies since the 2000s due to enhanced integration of trade and capital flow. We just discussed just half an hour before that India's economy post liberalization, post LPG is very much synchronized with the very much integrated with the all the advanced economies. So if something is going wrong in any of the advanced economy, then definitely the wrath of that wrongdoings will be faced by the Indian economy also. So if there is a global slowdown, then definitely adverse impact of that global slowdown will be on the India. So global slowdown is also there, inflation is also there, COVID-19 was there, and Russia-Ukraine crisis is there. Okay. All these things are currently troubling Indian economy. Now, this is the current state of economy. Okay. Now, what has the budget tried to achieve in this situation? Now, this is the situation. We are very much aware the consumption is facing trouble. We need to increase the consumption in order to attain the growth. Now, faced with the slowing domestic growth rate is slow. Global recession fear are there. What is recession? Recession means continuously there is a growth rate is very low. That possibility of recession. We read about it now. What is the recession? Global recession fears, persistently elevated prices, inflationary pressure is there. Why inflationary pressure is there? We know that when the COVID came, at the time of COVID, there was a lockdown came into picture. All the industries have been shut down by the governments, and there was a complete lockdown for almost 2, 3, 4 months. Just because of this lockdown, there was a production process was halted, and apart from essentials, because essentials you cannot halt the production of essentials because people won't survive without food and all these things. So most of the industries were at halt. They were not producing anything. People were unemployed. They went to their homes. They were doing nothing. They were sitting idle at home, and that's why they were using their savings in order to survive. They were using their savings. In that case, what happened? The government came up with the fiscal stimulus once the spread of pandemic came into a control zone, that now the spread is in control, the vaccines are coming. Then what government did? Government come with the fiscal stimulus packages. in India, that was the Atmanirbhar Bharat and Garib Kalyan Yojana, and these two are very important. In the Atmanirbhar Bharat, what government did? Government gave privileges and incentivized the industries to revive them. On the other hand, they were also expecting the central bank of country to ease the monetary policy or the monetary easing, so that the easy credit should be available for the industries so they can revive their production. If easy credit would be available, then they can revive the production. Once they revive the production, then again we can attain the virtuous cycle of the economy. But what happened, for a long period of time, government was went continuously on the path of the fiscal stimulus, and the central bank of country also went on the path of the monetary easing. But just because of that monetary easing, there was a huge liquidity in the market. For almost 2 years, the Central Bank of India, that is RBI, didn't change the policy rate, which is the repo rate. Due to this, there was a huge liquidity in the market. But on the other hand, on the fiscal part, the production process was not at par with the monetary easing which was done by the RBI. So somewhere there was a not synchronization between the monetary aspects and the fiscal aspect of the country, and that's why there was a sudden increase in the liquidity, and that increase resulted in the inflation. And this happened with in all the major countries. It is not only limited to India. In the USA, in the UK, and other countries also this happened. Okay, so it gives to the inflationary pressure. Now recently, for almost 1 year, all the central banks of the countries are trying to they are going on the path of the monetary tightening. But still, on the fiscal part or on the production part, the industries are still facing the problem. They are not at par with their at par with the output which they were generating pre-COVID level. So still there is a problem. So on the one hand, the government is still facing trouble in reviving the industries, but they cannot expect the monetary authority to go on the path of ease, because there is already enough liquidity in the market, and the inflation rate is high, because that inflation ultimately trouble the common man. Okay, so persistently elevated prices. Why prices elevated in these 2-3 years? Okay, did you get my point now? What is the why the prices elevated in these 2-3 years? Please respond.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Unemployment worries. The growth was not at par with the potential. It means more people are sitting idle. Still more people are sitting idle. It means unemployment is there, and unemployment paves the way for the social unrest. So unemployment worries is there. So these are all the problems. High fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is high. Why fiscal deficit is high? Because at the time of the just after the COVID, government was not earning, government was not receiving so much money, because the economy was not functioning properly on the one hand, and on the other hand, government need to spend more. So the expenditure was high. When expenditure was high and the receipts are low, definitely your deficit will increase. The fiscal deficit was high fiscal deficit, and a general election in the next 14 months. Oh, that's the political point of view. Then in the next 14 years, 14 months, the general election are due. Sitharaman decided to stay the course with the strategy she adopted in 19. Adopted 19 ka strategy, that is the fiscal prudence. So these are the problems. Now the first thing is the raising capital expenditure. We learned about it. Capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is the money that is spent on the building productive assets such as roads, bridges, and ports. This has a greater return to the economy. Now this is important. We are aware that if you spend money, in the capital expenditure, in the infrastructure creation, what you will receive? You will receive good returns in the future that helps in the generating the sustainability in the economy. So the building productive assets such as roads, bridges, and ports, this has a greater return to the economy. And every 100 spent leads to a rupees 250 gains in the economy. Now this is very important. These kind of things can also be asked by the UPSC. So every rupees 100 spent leads to rupees 250 gains for the economy. If you spend 100 rupees, you will receive 250 gain. Revenue expenditure, on the other hand, returns less than rupees 100. Revenue expenditure is committed expenditure. Okay. So you won't receive that much. So government is going on the path that first it is increasing the capital expenditure. Second, sticking to fiscal prudence. The FM finance minister has assured that the fiscal deficit, market borrowing by the government, fiscal deficit is nothing but the market borrowing by the government, will fall to 5.9% of the GDP. So fiscal deficit will fall to 5.9% of the GDP. This is what finance minister is assuring. This is expected to have a salutary impact on the broader economy, as it suggests that money will be available for private entrepreneurs to borrow and invest. Now understand this. This is very important. Government said that private people are important. Okay. Now there are financial intermediaries in the market. There are banks, there are NBFCs, non-banking financial companies, and there are so many other intermediaries in the market. So all these intermediaries receive money from the common man and they channelize that money to the business and corporates. Now here we are very much aware that all the financial intermediaries do this operation. Now government, whenever government needs money, what government do? Government can borrow money. Government can borrow internally or government can borrow externally. Externally, government can go to some nations or some multinational bodies. Internally, government can ask um, for money to the RBI, or on the other hand, government can raise money by the virtue of the securities. Now, government can issue the government security or treasury bill and can raise money from the market. Now, if government will raise money internally from the market, then these NBFCs have to give money to the government. And in that case, if government is raising so much money, then the huge part of the financial intermediaries money will go to the government. In that case, the less money would be available for the private players, because NBFCs and all these, what they do, financial intermediaries, they will lend money to the corporates and the other individuals. So if government borrowing would be high, then government will take more money from the financial intermediaries. In that case, the less money would be available for the private sector. That is called the crowding out of private sector. Means when the money would not be available for the private sector, then private sector won't go on the path of expansion because money would not be available. That is called the crowding out of private people. Understand? That is called crowding out. Now, what government is saying? Government is saying that we will reduce our fiscal deficit. Means we will reduce our borrowings. We will reduce our internal borrowings. Means by the virtue of government securities, we try to borrow as less as possible. As less as possible means they will reduce it. When they will reduce it, then what will happen? The less money from the financial intermediaries will go to the government. More money will be available for the private sector. Means the credit to the private sector would be easily available. And what will happen? It is called the crowding in of private sector. Crowding in of private players. Got it? This point, did you understand? Crowding in, crowding out, समझ में आया?
Yes, sir.
Good. So that would be the crowding in. That is the, as suggested, that money will be available for private entrepreneurs to borrow and invest, because borrow के लिए available रहेगा. Now, new personal income tax regime is now default. Now, understand one thing. Although I will make a different small video on the income tax regimes, we discussed about the personal income tax. Okay, how the personal income tax is calculated. But let me tell you one thing which we haven't discussed in our lecture. We'll make a very separate video for it. That personal income tax, we are very much aware there are tax slabs. So your income is calculated, and how that is calculated, we did all the calculation. Here we need to understand there are two tax regimes, two income tax regimes are there. Understand it, two income tax regimes are there. One is called the old tax regime, second is called the new tax regime. Old tax regime is the tax regime which we discussed. Old tax regime is the tax regime which we discussed. Okay. And new tax regime is the regime which came in the 2020. In 2020, government launched the new tax regime. According to that tax regime, tax slabs are different as compared to the old tax regime. Those people who are already paying tax according to the old tax regime can join new tax regime. Keep in mind. Okay, understand this. This is a little bit different. Old tax regime is already there. Old tax regime is there. Government came up with the new tax regime, that is in 2020. And joining the new tax regime was voluntarily. Means if you are paying taxes according to old tax regime, you can go with it. But if you are feeling that in the new tax regime you might get benefited, then you can join the new tax regime. Okay, got it? And if you are feeling that in the new tax regime you are not doing well, you can also go to the old tax regime. Okay, in whichever way you want in one financial year, there is a possibility. Okay, and slabs were different. We will discuss about it, about the new tax and old tax regime in a separate lecture. Don't worry, we will make a small video on it. Now understand it. Old tax regime is there, is still there. New tax regime is still there. Now government is saying that we are making the new tax regime default. Default means if once you are leaving the old tax regime and coming into new tax regime, then you can't go back to the old tax regime. If once you join the new tax regime, then you must stay in the new tax regime. Old tax regime is also there. Means old tax regime is also there. So currently in direct income tax have two tax regimes, old and the new, and you can join any of it according to the benefits you are getting it. Why we have two tax regime, we will discuss in that lecture. Okay. So in this budget, what government said that if you are leaving old tax regime and coming into new tax regime, then you can't go back to the old one. Okay, you must stay in the new one only. Government want that all the people must do transaction, do transition and come to the new tax regime. Government want all the people in the new tax regime. Okay. Now, new personal income tax regime is now default. Default means once you join it, you can't go back. And those new, all the new people, whoever will join, will come in the new tax regime. They can't go on the old one. Salaried Indians were expecting some relief on the income tax front. The FM provided it, but in the so-called new personal income tax regime, means all the people who are in the new tax regime will be benefited by the provision made in this budget. Those people who are in the old tax regime won't get benefited. Means only those people who are paying tax according to the new tax regime, who have adopted the new tax regime, will get benefited. Okay. New personal income tax regime, which was introduced in 20 but did not have many takers. Means many people were staying in the old one only. Even after coming of the new one, people are reluctant to join new one because of some reason. We will discuss about it. The FM has used the incentives to popularize the income tax regime while also declaring that it will now be default scheme. Default means you can't go back. Until last year, it was optional with the proviso that once you adopted it, you could not go back to the old income tax regime. Okay. So that was the thing. We will discuss about income tax in our next class, or a separate video will be make on. We will make a separate video. So, will the finance minister budget strategy work? Now, this is a little bit understanding. The economic survey released on Tuesday made a tacit admission that between 14 and 22, 14 means when the Narendra Modi took the office of Prime Minister, the NDA government, between 2014 and 2022 means till now, in these 8 years, India's economy hadn't grown at the rate it was expected to. This is what economic survey accepted, that in these 8 years, economy would have grown much faster, but it hadn't grown at the rate it was expected to. The survey, it is according to economic survey, the survey blamed unexpected shocks such as COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, apart from the old problems of banks being saddled with the non-performing assets. Okay, means survey said that in these 8 years, economy would have grown much faster, but it hadn't grown at the rate it was expected to, just because some unexpected shocks, the COVID pandemic, war in Ukraine, and the old problems of bank. गाने की आवाज आ रही है आप लोगों को? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And the song which was playing in the background?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you tell me what was the song? Nobody knew. Okay, so let's get back to the analysis of the survey. So survey said that economy would have grown much faster, but hadn't grown, and the reasons were the COVID pandemic, war in Ukraine. These are the kind of recent reasons, but even before the coming of the pandemic, the first tenure of the government was completed. So apart from the old problems of banks being settled with the non-performing assets. So according to the economic survey, the non-performing assets was the main problem, and the twin balance sheet problem of the, because the company's balance sheet was not healthy, the balance sheet of banks were not healthy because of the non-performing assets. So those were the diseases Indian economy was suffering, and just because of those diseases, Indian economy hadn't grown at rate it was expected to. It argued that in 2023 would finally change India's fortune, and that for the remainder of the decade, India would see a growth surge similar to that witnessed from 2003 onwards. So from 2003 to 2008, we know that the growth rate was very high, and this economic survey is anticipating that 2023 would finally change India's fortune, and in the remainder decade, India would grow, you know, with a very good growth rate. In 2019, when the government was re-elected, the economy was going through a significant slowdown. We are aware that nearly 3.2% was the growth rate, I think, in 2019. So government was re-elected. The economy was going through a significant slowdown. At that time, several economists asserted that it was a demand-led slowdown. It was a demand-led slowdown. Consumption demand was down because unemployment was at historic high and growth had been faltering for the third successive year. Now, this is what you need to understand. Here we have a little bit critical appraisal of the analysis of the survey and the budget. Here we need to understand that in 2019, the growth rate was nearly 3%. And for last 3 years, in the 17, 18, and 19, last 3 years, there was a continuous reduction in the growth post demonetization. There was reduction in the growth, and many economists were saying that it is demand-led slowdown. Why demand-led slowdown? Means the demand in the economy is less. Consumption demand was down because unemployment was at historic high. Why unemployment? Because just because of demonetization and the GST implementation, many of the industries were facing problem. The liquidity problem was there, and the growth was not at par with the potential. So unemployment was there, and unemployment was high. When unemployment will be high, the consumption expenditure would be less. Definitely consumption will be less, and the demand would be less. So that is the demand driven slowdown. Demand driven slowdown means industry side, like the from the product supply side is not the problem. Means industries don't need incentives. Industry needs incentive, but primarily consumption expenditure is the problem, and the demand side, demand driven slowdown is there. Okay, so this is what experts said. At that time, several economists asserted that it was a demand-led slowdown. Consumption demand was down because unemployment was at historic high, and growth had been faltering for the third successive years. So it was demand-led slowdown. However, the government saw the slowdown as supply-led slowdown. Government said no, it is a supply-led slowdown. As such, it started on path where instead of boosting consumption by giving a tax relief, either on income tax or GST, it gave tax relief to corporates. Now understand it. In 2019, the corporate tax cut was there. Corporate tax cut was there. Historical corporate tax cut, because it wants the private sector to play its part. It wants to acknowledge the importance of private sector. That's why it incentivized the private sector by cutting down their corporate tax rate. That was the thing. That was somewhere justiciable, because when you cut down the corporate tax rate, that will ultimately kind of crowding in of private player. First thing is and the private player will invest more. Private player remain with more money and will try to expand it, and that expansion will lead to more production. And in order to produce more, they need more people, and the problem of unemployment can be resolved. Okay? That's the one aspect of it from the government's point of view. But experts said no, it was not the supply side problem, because supply side problem was not it was the demand led problem. But government said no, supply side. When supply side problem is what you are understanding, that supply side problem is there, then what you will do? You will try to incentivize the industries. So government said there is a supply side problem, that's why we will reduce the corporate tax rate, and that will incentivize the private sector. Private sector will expand itself, and they will give more jobs to the people. This is the aspect of the government. Experts said no, it was a demand led. So in order to increase the consumption demand, what you need to do, you need to increase the disposable income of the people. So in order to increase, you need to reduce the tax, that is GST or the income tax or anything like that. So the people's disposable income can be increased. That will increase consumption, and like that. So there were two different arguments. Some experts were saying that it is demand led, and some were saying it is a supply side. So government was of the firm belief that it is a supply side. That's why they gave relief to the corporates rather than to the people in the tax. This was the first thing we understood. That is the growth strategy. Okay. Now the second is the fiscal situation. Now we'll go a little faster because we understood the basic idea. Now, what's the fiscal situation? The government has been able to stick to a fiscal deficit target of 6.4% of the GDP in its revised estimate for 22-23. Now, 23 is going to end in the end of March after 1 month, and the government's fiscal deficit target is 6.4% for this, and government is saying that we might achieve it, 6.4%. With the government sticking to the fiscal consolidation path, the move towards a sub 6% fiscal deficit target in the next financial year of 23-24 from 6.4% of the GDP comes on the back of these things. Now government is expecting that it would go to almost 5.9%. Sub 6% means below 6. So government is anticipating that our fiscal deficit would be 5.9. It is coming in the next slides. So government is saying that 6.4% would be the fiscal deficit for the 22-23, like this coming financial year. Okay, 22-23, 6.4. For the next financial year, that is 23-24, for which the budget has came, it is saying that we will go below 6, that is sub 6%. So in order to attain that, sub 6%, on the back of, like, what should be the backing? An effective compression in expenditure. Your expenditure must be reduced, including cuts in Manrega. Manrega cuts should be there. Utilizing savings on the back of reduction in subsidies. Subsidies should be reduced. And expectation of high revenue growth. You're expecting the revenue growth from the disinvestment, because revenue, not disinvestment. You are expecting the high revenue growth. Okay, means from the gross tax revenue that we are talking about. Okay, disinvestment proceeds are also there. Okay, disinvestment proceed you will receive, that would be your capital receipt part. Okay, but that is part of receipt. So these all things government is expecting. Though the government has not detailed its fiscal deficit target beyond 23-24. Okay, now medium term fiscal policy, come fiscal policy strategy statement. This is the statement government must come up with the budget. We discussed about it in the FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, that the three other documents must be presented by the finance minister along with the annual financial statement budget. So one of them is the medium term fiscal policy come fiscal policy strategy statement. Okay, so it is saying that though the government has not detailed its fiscal deficit targets beyond 23-24, 23-24 till 2024 government came up with the target that this would be our target in the 23-24, but till now government haven't said anything beyond that what would be their target beyond that. Just oral um, statement given by the finance minister, that it is said it intends to stick to this fiscal glide path. Now, what is fiscal glide path? Fiscal glide path means the consolidation path. It's a kind of the target which we already have, and we will try to achieve that target, and we will make our finances in such a way that our fiscal deficit target must be met. That is called fiscal glide path. It's a kind of fiscal consolidation path to reach the fiscal deficit target of below 4.5% by financial year 25-26. So they are expecting that if they will go according to fiscal glide path on which they are right now going, they might reach the fiscal deficit target of below 4.5% by financial year 25-26. Okay, till 25-26, the government is expecting to have their fiscal deficit 4.5%. Okay, currently it is 6.4%. So almost 2% reduction in the fiscal deficit they are expecting in financial year 25-26. I'm telling you, no need to remember all the data. Okay, there's so much data, no need to remember data, but the fiscal deficit is very important. So you must remember what government is thinking and how government will do it. Okay. Now, following the fiscal prudence, the government is aiming to follow path of fiscal prudence by sticking to its fiscal glide path. Glide path, aa raha hai niche. High nominal growth along with the buoyancy in revenues and compression in the non-essential expenditure apart from savings on the subsidies expected to support the government's move towards a sub 6% fiscal deficit target for this. Now, government want to achieve the sub 6% fiscal deficit target in 23-24. Means they want the fiscal deficit should be below 6. For the last financial year, they said it would be 6.4. For the 22-23, they are saying it would be 6.4. But for 23-24, they are expecting it to stay below 6, the sub 6%. For fiscal deficit to stay below 6, they need something. Na? These all things we already discussed. Now, this fiscal glide path means go according to target. High nominal growth rate. Nominal growth rate means inflation should not be adjusted. Okay. A nominal growth and real growth we discussed in our national income chapter. So high nominal growth along with the buoyancy in the revenues. Buoyancy in the revenues means your revenues should be increased. There should be buoyancy, means your revenue should be increased proportionally when the other dimensions other growth aspects are there. That is called the buoyancy. So the bounce, you know what is the basic buoyancy. So buoyancy in the revenues and compression in the non-essential expenditure. There are non-essential expenditure, you are compressing them. Apart from savings on the subsidies you are saving because you are rationalizing, is expected to support government's move. So sub 6% if you want, you need all these things. Your revenue should be high, and subsidies, we discussed it. Okay. The government intend to stick to its fiscal glide path to reach the fiscal deficit target of below 4.5% by this. This we discussed. Okay. 25-26 till 25-26, government is expecting that they will go below 4.5, which is difficult. But if government will go on the this fiscal prudence and the fiscal gliding path, they might achieve it. Gliding path is what? Is the path the finance ministry and by extension the government takes to fulfill the fiscal targets it sets for itself. Okay, consolidation path. Fiscal glide path is important as it ensures that government stick to its fiscal consolidation roadmap to achieve its fiscal deficit target. Okay, so gliding path, fiscal gliding path means you must stick to your targets and you will make all the policies in such a way that you will achieve the target set by you, that fiscal deficit target. The NK Singh committee constituted by Modi government recommended a fiscal glide path for the government that would have gradually brought down the fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP by end of FY20. Now, it was a kind of impossible thing, 3% end of FY20, further reduced to 2.8 FY21, 2.5 FY23. These all targets are breached, but there is a escape clause. Okay, these all targets are breached because there were COVID pandemic and other things. Wait. So following the continued economic slowdown which has hit tax collection and other government revenue sources, the current fiscal deficit target likely to be breached. It is already breached. The NK Singh committee added escape clause. Escape clause means if you are not attending it, you can escape the circumstances. You can escape the situation. In its recommendation, allowing the government slippage up to 50 basis points. 50 basis point means 0.5% of the GDP in case of extraordinary circumstances. The government can invoke the proviso if it deems necessary. Yeah, so, we can understand that even the escape clause is also breached because the fiscal deficit is above 6. So should we take a break?
Sir, how long the class will be?
It will take 45 minutes, nearly
Okay, sir.
45 to 1 hour. So let's take a break of 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So after 10 minutes, everybody should be here. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Wait for a moment. Camera is not working. But let me rejoin. Audio okay है. What's wrong with the video? हेलो. मैं दिख रहा हूँ.
हेलो सर. सर
कुछ
नहीं,
दिख
एक
रहा है?
बैकग्राउंड दिख रहा है. हाँ, एक बैकग्राउंड दिख रहा है, बुक्स रखा है, ये सब दिख रहा है. आप नहीं दिख रहे.
वेट 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 वेट. क्या हो गया? अभी मैं दिख रहा हूँ? हेलो?
यस सर, अब दिख रहे हैं। हाँ सर, दिख रहे हैं।
पीपीटी विजिबल है अब?
यस सर है।
Okay. In a different view.
यस सर।
Okay, so we are discussing about the fiscal situation, and economy is on right track to grow at 7% in financial year 23. This is what finance minister said. Means we are on a right track according to our finance ministry, and it is going to grow at 7% in the financial year 23. In the financial year 23. Despite the global slowdown caused by COVID-19 and Russia-Ukraine war, Indian economy is expected to grow at 7% in fiscal year 22-23. The highest rate of growth among all major economies, Finance Minister Sitharaman said on Wednesday. I'm telling you again, it is the highest rate of growth among the major economies. Major economies means जो large economies हैं, like United States, UK, and the other major economies, China. So among the major economies, India's growth rate is comparatively good. She said the country's economy is on the right track and heading towards the bright future despite all the challenges. We are going in the right direction. Now the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio we can see here, okay, 3.4, 3.8, 9.2 in between at the time of COVID, then 6.9, 6.4, and the 5.9. The government is expecting that in the next financial year, the sub 6% fiscal deficit would be there. That is 5.9% in the 23-24, and in the 22-23, which is the current fiscal, the government is saying that it would have the fiscal deficit of 6.4%. And before that there was 6.9 and 9.2 at the time of the 2020 and 2021, when the COVID was at peak and the government expenditure was very high and government borrowing was also high. So at that time the fiscal deficit was 9.2, which was disastrously very high. But at that time, that was the need of the hour. Okay, so these are the fiscal deficit figures. You must keep these figures in your mind. Here the weighted contribution of GDP growth, you can see all the four components are here: net exports, the government finance consumption expenditure, private finance consumption expenditure, and the gross fixed capital formation, that is the investment. So this is the contribution of all these factors in the last 5 years. So you must UPSC sometimes ask question from the trends, so you must keep these things in your mind. Okay, these and this. So emerging out of COVID woes, outlay on subsidies, Manrega lower as pandemic disruption cases. We know that subsidies outlay has been reduced. Manrega outlay is also reduced. Means the expenditure which government is going to do in these sectors is reduced. Subsidies in the MGNREGA as pandemic disruption eases. Okay. Pandemic disruption ceases where that ultimately eases. Disruptions are not there. So along with the 20, let me tell you one thing. There are so many data you are going, you will come across in the next upcoming slides. So no need to remember all the data. Just understand that, understand the trends. So along with the rupees 29,400 crores reduction in the budget for the MGNREGA. So there was a almost 30,000 crore reduction in the MGNREGA budget this year. It would generate savings of over rupees 1.76 lakh crore, amounting to 0.6% of the GDP. Means this is one of the part, that there are other reductions, subsidy reduction and MGNREGA reductions, and some other reductions are there. All these reduction collectively help government to save almost 1.76 lakh crore. 1.76 lakh crore. This is the 1.76 लाख करोड़ जो 2G स्पेक्ट्रम में इतना अमाउंट था. It would generate saving of over rupees 1.76 lakh crore amounting to 0.6% of the GDP. So overall GDP का 0.6% you will save if you will reduce these amounts. So amount which is reduced in the MG Narega is 30,000 crore nearly. The center subsidy outgo on the three Fs, which is food, fertilizer, and fuel. Food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, and fuel, that is petroleum subsidy, is expected to be 1.47 lakh crore lower in the coming fiscal compared to 2023. Means almost 1.76 lakh crore lower than the previous year. So subsidy is rationalized. Along with this reduction in the budget for the MG Narega, it would generate savings of over 1.76 lakh crore, amounting to this we already discussed. That's more than the fall in the fiscal deficit from 6.4% to 5.9. Now 6.4% is the fiscal deficit in the current financial year. 5.9 is what government is expecting in the next financial year. This reduction is 0.5. This reduction is 0.5%. Now the fiscal deficit would be reduced by 0.5%, but almost 0.6% savings is also government expecting, because government have saved 1.76 lakh crore rupees by just reducing amount on the MG Narega and the subsidies. Targeted by the Finance Minister Sitharaman for the 2024. The above savings are result of economies ostensibly emerging completely out of the pandemic-induced disruption. Why these savings? Why government is on a leverage side to reduce these things or reduce these expenditures? Because the pandemic-induced disruptions are not very severe now. Okay. Sitharaman budgeted a food subsidy of this much. No need to remember, just have a rough idea about the food subsidy. Food subsidy is this much, the lowest since 1920 and the way below to peak 541,330 crore for 2021. Now 2021 was the year when the COVID was at peak and the government came up with the Garib Kalyan Yojana and the other schemes to distribute free ration to the people. The additional benefits were also there. So almost 5,41,000, almost 5.5 lakh crore for the for the food subsidy in the 2021, and in the upcoming year, that is 2023, government is coming up with the 197,000 crores nearly for the food subsidy. So the apparent normalization of economic activity and hence no perceived need for special alleviation measure. We know that COVID-19 is not as severe as compared to the 2020. So today we can have we can see the normalization in the economic activity. That's why we don't need special alleviation measures anymore. So also account for the outlay on Narega being projected at 60,000. So before that it was nearly 90,000. And the 60,000 is now, because almost 29,000 crore reduction was there. The current allocation is 60,000 crores. It means before that the allocation was nearly 90,000. Against the current fiscal year's revised estimates, no need to remember all the data. Okay, this is just for your information. Major subsidies, we are very much aware, the food, fertilizer, petroleum, and total. So food subsidy is very high. Fertilizer is also there. Petroleum subsidy is also there. Okay. Fertilizer subsidy, the record expenditure is revised estimate is largely courtesy to the Russia-Ukraine war. Just because there are so many NPK fertilizer specifically, India have a very huge import dependence on the other countries in the fertilizer sector, and the Russia-Ukraine war, the Ukraine is one of the very big supplier of some fertilizers and their input which is required to produce the some fertilizers. So Russia and Ukraine both are the source of raw material for that, and just because of this clash, Russia-Ukraine clash, the fertilizer price in the international market went really high. The war induced supply disruption led to international prices of fertilizer as well as their intermediates and raw material spiking. Okay, just because of this there was a supply side disruptions. But these have significantly eased in the last few months, just because there is a something hot pursuit is not going on between Russia and Ukraine. That's why, and the supply disruptions are very less, and again the supply chain is working, and there is a continuous supply of the raw material and the other material which is required to produce the fertilizers. So there is a ease for the last few months, and landed price of urea imported to India have come down to this, which is relatively less. Okay, and in the December January to 450, means almost half ho gaya. So just because of that, the prices of the fertilizer are going down. The fall in the global price is expected to bring down the fertilizer subsidy outgo for the coming fiscal. Okay, just because the prices are eased, that's why government can reduce the fertilizer subsidy. So those were the two things. Now third is the infrastructure. Now infrastructure push was given by the government. Now we understood the basic idea. Now just understand the major steps taken by the government. So renewed thrust on the capex, capital expenditure is given a big push. Outlay hike 33% to 10 lakh crores. Now in this budget, the overall cost of the outlay of the capital expenditure is 10 lakh crore, which is 33% more than the last year. So it is a huge amount that government is going to spend in the capital expenditure to aid investment in infrastructure center to continue its 50-year interest-free loans to state government for additional 12 months. So what government is saying, central government is saying that we want even the state governments to invest in the infrastructure. So government is continuing its 50-year interest-free loans to state governments for additional 12 months. Okay, for 12 months, state governments can also avail the facility of the 50-year interest-free loans. Okay, so this is continuation for 1 year. Hike 33% in the capital expenditure, and capital expenditure is going almost 10 lakh crore in the upcoming fiscal. The union government has again chosen capital expenditure as a key focus area in the 23-24. FM Nirmala Sitharaman Wednesday said that the center will continue to its 50-year interest-free loans to states for an additional 12 months in order to aid infrastructure investment with an outlay of 1.3 lakh crore. No need to mug up this. Just understand that 50-year interest-free loans has been increased by 1 year. The center's capital expenditure outlay will be 10 lakh crore for financial year 24. 10 lakh crore, an increase of 33% year on year. The government, however, had fallen short of exhausting its budget estimate for capital expenditure for this financial year. It is saying that the financial for this financial year 22-23, government was expecting, government was having an outlay that we will spend this much, but till now government is falling short of exhausting that. Means if government thought of spending 10,000 crores, then even till now government haven't achieved that much. So fallen short of exhausting the budget estimate for this year. The revised estimate for 2023 for effective capital expenditure stand at this, which is 98.7% of budget estimate of this. Means falling short. Okay, no need to mug up all the revised and advanced estimates. This is just to take an idea. Now, Indian Railway, an amount of 2.4 lakh crore has been provided for the Indian Railway for 1 year. 2.4 lakh crore, the highest ever outlay, and the 9 times the outlay made in the 13-14. So no need to compare this because in 10 years there are so many changes. But yeah, in 13-14 the outlay was something, and this is the 9 times in the last 10 years. So 2.4 lakh crore for Indian Railway, which is highest ever outlay in the history of ministry. Sitharaman said roads and railways have been two sectors that have been seen higher additional capital outlay over the last few budgets and have been central to the government's capex push. Now capital expenditure is the main core focus of the government, and within the capital expenditure, government's focus is on the roads and the railways. So almost 10 lakh crores government is giving to the capex push, and in this 10 lakh crore, almost 2.4 lakh crore out of this 10, almost 25% capital expenditure is going in the Indian Railways, and roads and railways are at the core of the government's capital expenditure push. You must keep in mind. Okay. Sitharaman also said that 50 additional airport, water aerodromes, and advanced landing grounds will be revived for regional connectivity. Now, this government is also committed to the regional air connectivity, that is the UDAN scheme, that is Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme. Okay, which is the economically feasible for the common man and to connect the regional cities of the country. That is UDAN scheme. So government is saying that the 50 additional airport, water aerodromes and advanced landing grounds will be revived for the regional air connectivity. Okay, that is the UDAN scheme. The survey 22-23 tabled in Parliament and authored by Chief Economic Advisor V. Anant Nageshwaran had emphasized on the importance of capital expenditure to crowd in private investment and to drive growth. We are aware about the crowding in the private investment. We discussed it. Now, the government thrust on capital, particularly in the infrastructure and incentive sector like roads and highways, railways and housing and urban affairs, has longer-term implication for growth, the survey stated. We are aware that if we are investing in the capital expenditure, then definitely we will have a long-term implication for growth. Nudge for private investment. The thirst towards capital expenditure by the government indicate a nudge to crowd in private investment. We discussed about it, how government is going to nudge in the government to crowd in the private investment. This will help drive growth and all these things. We are aware, we discussed about it. Now, push for highway sector. Now, we are aware that FM is saying that roads and highways are at the core of the capital push. So almost 25% of the outlay, 25% outlay of the capital expenditure is going to Indian Railway. Roads is also there. So here, push for the highway sectors. NHAI, that is National Highway Authority of India, which is responsible for the making the highways for India. Allocation up means going up. The allocation to the NHAI has been increased to rupees 1.62 lakh crore for 2023, up from the last year's revised allocation, which is almost 1.62 lakh crore. Giving a financial push to scrap old polluting vehicles owned by government, Finance Minister Sitharaman said that she allocated adequate funds to scrap old vehicles owned by central government, and states will also be supported in replacing old vehicles. Vehicle scrapping policy is there of the government. So all the vehicles which are of had completed almost 15 years will be scrapped, just because of we are concerned about the environmental sustainability, and the new vehicles will be will replace them. Okay, that's the scrappage policy, vehicle scrappage policy of the government. So the adequate funds would be available so that they can be scrapped and the new vehicles can be purchased. Recently, Ministry of Road Transport notified that starting from April 1, the government vehicles of the center, states, PSUs and autonomous bodies would be scrapped if they had completed 15 years. Okay. Now, the Nitin Gadkari, the Road Transport Minister, had said an estimated 9 lakh vehicles owned by central state government transport corporation public sector would go off the road from April 1. Almost 9 lakh vehicles means they will be replaced by the newer one. Huge 9 lakh vehicles. Sitharaman said 100 critical transport infrastructure projects. Critical transport infrastructure project means they ultimately have a last mile connectivity for coal, fertilizer, food, grains. These are the things which are at the core of the growth of our economy. So for the last mile connectivity for the transportation of coal, fertilizer, food, grain sectors would be identified and they would be taken up on the priority basis. So 100 critical transport infrastructure for transporting these core communities. Okay. Coastal shipping would be given larger will be given importance. Coastal shipping means coastal shipping is not about the transportation or the international shipping like that. No, coastal shipping means on a same coast you can say the read here. Let's have a proper definition. Coastal shipping is confined to a country. It is a type of cabotage where goods are transported from point A to point B along a country's coast by small vessels. Means country ke hi coast hai. Okay, on the same coast, they are just transporting the goods. That is the coastal shipping. So coastal shipping would be promoted. Okay. Promoted as energy efficient and lower cost mode of transport both for the passengers and freight through PPP, that public-private partnership, with viability gap funding. Viability gap funding means if a project is launched by the government, that you must go according to that. Now government is saying that if that particular project cost almost 100 rupees, but uh, cost 100 rupees, but you are doing it and you are going in loss, then that gap of that loss will be paid by the government. That is called viability gap funding. Okay. Sometimes there are so many projects which are economically viable, but financially they are not feasible. Financially you might have loss, but economically they will produce some extra benefits for the economy. That in that case government come up with the viability gap funding. Now, handed its highest ever allocation, railway plans more lines Vande Bharat factories. What railway is planning with that? 2 to 3 Vande Bharat train sets produce simultaneously 4 factories to roll out from the railway stables every week by next year. Means every week 2 to 3 Vande Bharat train sets they want to produce. Okay, this is what railway is thinking about. In line with the focus of the budget, the railway received its highest ever allocation of 2.4 lakh crore, rupees 1 lakh crore higher than previous year. Okay, rupees 1 lakh crore higher. The railway has kept a capital spend target of 2.6 lakh crore. This is the highest ever and also 9 times that of 13. This is we discussed. Apart from bouquet of projects, new lines and doubling of existing tracks. New lines and doubling of existing tracks. The railway will focus on increasing the pace of construction as well. Railway Ministry Ashwini Vaishnav said after the budget. Pace of construction. Pace of construction of what? The Vande Bharat Express and the other integrated coach factories are there to produce the coaches. Recently, we construct lines at the rate of 12 km per day. So line construction per day is 12 km per day. By next year, we hope to increase it to 60 km per day. Okay. So this is what government railway is expecting. At 12 km per day too, we will go to 16 km per day. 2 to 3 Vande Bharat train sets will roll out from the railway stables every week by next year. Produced simultaneously in 4 factories, he said. Additionally, there will be Vande Metro train sets to shuttle from cities to area within 50-60. So Vande Metro train sets would also be there. Okay. Vaishnav said that the design of Vande Metro's train set like Vande Bharat but smaller is being finalized. Means they are also working on the Vande Metro. Okay. Recently, Vande Bharat is manufactured only in the currently Vande Bharat is manufactured only in the ICF Chennai, Integrated Coach Factory Chennai only. We will expand the production of factories in Sonpat, Haryana, Latur, Maharashtra, Raebareli, Uttar Pradesh, so that by next year we can roll out 2 to 3 train set every week. Means other factories would also be they are already there, but the production activity would take place in these factories also. Vaishnav also said that railways will come out with the hydrogen run trains by the end of this year. This is also important, the hydrogen run trains. So in science and tech, you must read about the hydrogen energy. Then by the end of this year, these trains will initially run on heritage lines like Kalka and Shimla. So initially, the hydrogen run trains would be run on the heritage lines. In top gear, the ICF integrated coach factory has upped its production every year. 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, continuously the production number of production produced coaches is proliferated. So just keep this in mind. Okay. Now the rural infrastructure. In this budget, they also gave emphasis on the rural infrastructure. In a big push to rural infrastructure, the government has allocated this much for its flagship rural housing scheme, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is there, and that is the have 2 parts, the Gramin part and the urban part. For the Gramin part, they have increased a huge chunk of money. Okay. Allocation of 70,000 crore for Jal Jeevan Mission. We know about Jal Jeevan Mission. In Jal Jeevan Mission, a scheme aimed at providing tap water connection to rural household. So Jal Jeevan Mission, a huge chunk of money. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Gramin, huge chunk of money. Now the detail available in the budget document show that rupees 79,000 crore rupees 79,000 crore allocated for the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, rural and urban both. So overall is 79,000 crore. An amount of 54,000, nearly 55,000 crore has been earmarked for the Gramin. Means out of 80,000, nearly 80,000, 55,000 crore is for the rural. Means urban का कम है, rural का ज्यादा है. Rural पे focus है. That will ultimately help in the asset creation in the rural area. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, and this was the restructuring of the Indira Awas Yojana, which was already there. Housing for all by 2022, but it was deadline was extended to 2024 just because in between there were COVID year. Gramin in the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin generates employment both directly and indirectly, because when the houses will be constructed in the villages, then definitely that will generate the demand for the raw material, the cement and the other things also, and it will also create employment. Then the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, government retained it. Gram Sadak Yojana is a scheme started at the time when the Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of India in 2002, I think. So for this, they have an outlay. Jal Jeevan Mission, we are aware, a huge outlay for Jal Jeevan Mission. These are the data. You must remember the schemes and all these things. No need to remember the data. But yeah, if government is giving a big push to a particular sector, then there is a possibility that UPSC might ask question in the pre as well as in mains. PM Kisan Samman Nidhi, that is the 6,000 rupees when government provide to the farmers, peasants. PM Kisan allocation lowest in 5 years. It was started in 2019, before the 19 general election, and PM Kisan allocation has been reduced. This Kisan Samman Nidhi, when 6,000 rupees is provided to the eligible beneficiary in the 4 monthly installment, 2,000 each. Okay. Then Finance Minister also announced the digital public infrastructure for agriculture. In agriculture sector, there should be digital infrastructure. Digital infrastructure means the e-technology you will use and the public infrastructure you will create. Public infrastructure means that infrastructure will be used by all the people in that particular area. Means we are talking about agriculture. Then those e-technology made resources will be used by all the people who are indulged in the activities of the agriculture. So also talked about digital public infrastructure for agriculture. Then the International Year of Millet is going on right now. So Shri Anna is the name given to the millet. Keep in mind, Shri Anna is the name given to the millets. This is the Indian conventional name, Shri Anna. The Indian Institute of Millet Research, Hyderabad, will be supported as a center for excellence for sharing best practices, research and technology at the international level. Okay, for the millet. So that's it for today. We will learn for 1 hour. We will take one more class for the budget. 2 sections are also there. 2 sections are still remaining. We will learn about it, and that's it for today. And these slides will be uploaded, so you can revise it. No need to go outside for budget. We are taking enough into consideration, and this would be sufficient. Okay, so no need to go beyond that. सारे लोग हैं यहाँ पे?
Sir, will we having any class on economic survey as well?
Definitely.
आपने बोला था.
हाँ, सर्वे की क्लास होगी ना. सर्वे का भी तो समरी करेंगे. ओके.
Okay, sir.
We will
Thank
do
you.
survey summary as well. Okay, then. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Have a good day.
Hmm.